Good morning. For this video, I kind of got finished with your grades for your draw alongs, and there were a couple things I wanted to just remind you of for your drawing for this week. You're gonna hear some construction outside. I have some concrete leveling being done for my patio, so sorry about that. I didn't really realize they were gonna start drilling, but I'll try and just talk over it. You'll hear it kind of coming in and out. So the first thing I want to show you is how to do the lines in the sidewalk, because a few of you seem to struggle with that, and it kind of threw off the perspective for your draw alongs. So I wanted to reiterate, as the sidewalk is one of your requirements for this creative drawing that you're doing yourself, I wanted to reiterate how to accomplish that, and then also the windows and doors for your buildings, so that you can have a little more creative freedom and understand how to accomplish these things that are requirements for your drawing. So for the sidewalk, I obviously want it to appear as though it ends on like the corner of the building, like it would kind of wrap around the building. So I'm gonna go ahead and draw my guidelines. I just kind of figured out like how wide I thought the sidewalk should be. And then I'm using those 2 points again to create that corner for my sidewalk. Go ahead and erase what I don't need. And then now is like the tricky part, because what I could do, I could just extend this line. I think that gets a little bit awkward, at least at first, until you have done some of your like lines in your sidewalk. I guess I should finish the boundaries here of the sidewalk where it would exist. So I'm attaching, oof, my ruler's sliding all over the place. I'm attaching to the edge of the building. Now, of course, if I wanted to make it look like it wraps around the back side of the building, I would come over here and I would use, let's see, I'm gonna use that vanishing point to kind of give it a bit of a bend right here. So now instead of this like extending all the way to Kingdom Come, I can have it like bend around, and I needed to just extend this a bit further. So hopefully you can see this. I know I'm kind of moving my paper all over the place. So I would have it extend a bit further there. There we go. That's what I needed to happen. So now it's gonna wrap around the building, so I can get rid of those guidelines again. I'm gonna do the same thing on this side for where it's going to wrap around. So I'm actually aligning it with the opposite vanishing point. Like it's where I'm drawing over here on this side of the drawing, and I'm using this vanishing point on the left side. So that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind, because this is how you're going to create the lines for your sidewalk. So let's say the sidewalk literally just went around this like one single building that I have. I just kind of wanted to show you how it would wrap around the edges and perspective, like so that you're creating, this is essentially like the stacked box in day one with your day one draw along that you did. But what I have, instead of turning this into a box, I'm just gonna keep it two-dimensional for the most part, because that's what my sidewalk's gonna be. I guess I could give it thickness, but from this distance from a building, I wouldn't notice the thickness of a sidewalk, so I'm not gonna go to that trouble. Again, in order to create the lines in the sidewalk, I need to use my vanishing points. Let me reiterate, when you're drawing in 2-point perspective, you're gonna use vertical lines, and then you're gonna use your vanishing point lines. You shouldn't have other random angles. So it becomes much more simple with perspective when you realize your limitations. Like, you know, with 1-point perspective, it was horizontals, verticals, and orthogonals. And in this case, it's going to be my orthogonals and my verticals. So it becomes even more simple, just 2 types of lines that I should be using. And I saw some of you using just some like random lines that weren't attached to either, and so that should be a clue to you moving forward. So in order, I'm going to keep my ruler attached to that left vanishing point, and that is how I'm going to create the lines in my sidewalk as I work my way around this sidewalk. I'm going to go to the opposite or the right vanishing point in order to create the lines on the left side of the drawing. And they could, of course, get a little closer as they go further back in space. I didn't really do that on the other side, but you get the idea there. Now it appears as though the sidewalk is actually like headed in the right direction, I guess, for, you know, for the perspective that we've created. You might be thinking, well, how do I handle, you know, the lines in the back or like where that would cut through? So I would suggest just kind of looking at like, it looks like this vanishing point would be a better way to create that angle on the corner if I'm wanting to add that in. In this case, I would use a vanishing point that's on the same side again to create that angle for that corner as it like wraps around, so that you have that accurate perspective. Again, it has to be a vertical or an orthogonal with, that means it goes back back to the vanishing point line, the vanishing points if you are drawing in 2-point perspective. So now what I'm going to do is just remind you of how to do your doors and your windows. So I'm going to start out whatever side of the building I'm working on, that's the vanishing point I'm going to start out using. I want to think about the overall height of my doorway, like with scale on this building. I mean, I don't want it to look like a super minuscule building. I want it to look like it's to scale. Now, in thinking of that, like maybe my sidewalk, I actually need to put more lines in to make the sidewalk appear smaller than what I currently have it, but I'm not going to mess with that at the moment. I used my orthogonal line to determine the angle for the top of my door. And now I'm going to use vertical lines, lines that are parallel to the lines of the building, the verticals of the building. I'm going to go ahead and use those for creating the sides of my door, side angles, so that I have, so that it works in perspective again. And then now to add windows to the building. Whatever side of the building you're working on, you're gonna use that vanishing point on the same side. And I'm gonna determine my overall, so right now what I'm doing is my layout for where my windows exist. So I'm creating guidelines for the height of my windows. I'll make them tall windows. We'll say this is like an old vintage style, or it could even be like modern contemporary style building. I'm gonna have the windows end a little closer to the edge of the building on the back side. I'm gonna make it look that way so it looks like they are moving back in space, because it would have that illusion again of depth that you're moving back in space. And then I'm using verticals for my window, for my overall window where it exists. Now I could leave this as a big open window if I wanted to. I could kind of show the depth, if it's modern contemporary architecture, I could show the depth of the window if I wanted to do that by using again the orthogonal line, creating the overall thickness of that window, and then using another orthogonal coming from the other vanishing point to determine the top angle. Again, as long as I stick to those rules of ooh, look how bad that angle was. I can kind of see it now. But as long as I stick to the rules of having verticals, make sure I get this right this time, orthogonals, I really can't go wrong as far as perspective is concerned, at least with 2-point perspective. So there we go. Again, you must have a straight edge for this drawing for things to be drawn in proportion, or to accurately, anytime you're doing perspective drawing. Let's say that I wanted to do and I did more of a setback in window, but you could add a balcony, you could do multiple windows. So I'll show you that next. So let's say below this window, let's go to the other side of the building. I want to create a row of windows, and we kind of did this in our draw alongs, but maybe you want a lot of windows. I would use that orthogonal line to kind of establish your boundaries for your windows. Maybe I do a ton of small ones on the back side of the building. Again, this is where architectural design comes in. If you really like this type of drawing, maybe architecture's in your future, I don't know. So I'm kind of determining the overall area, but now I'm gonna divide it up with my verticals. So using vertical lines, I'm gonna establish how wide, and maybe I'll do that on the top and bottom, because a lot of times buildings have, windows that are stacked symmetrically. So that's where that window set is gonna begin and end. This window set, move over here. Oh, I didn't draw the correct thickness. I'm gonna make these windows appear, I'm gonna make them just a little bit wider, again, to make them appear as though they're moving forward in space. I want them to be the same size ultimately, but I want them to look like they are, they're spaced out more as they come toward me, because again, that's just enhancing that illusion of depth. And then I'll end my windows right here. So if you had I'll erase out what I don't need, the guidelines that are in between the windows. If you had very simple windows that you drew, that would be okay with me. I mean, sometimes there's not a lot of details, or maybe you add some more details onto them. Maybe you make them sink back in, or maybe you add panes. If you want to add window panes to your windows, I mean, I think in a building it would have multiple panes, probably not just 4 like you would see in a house. So I'm just using my vertical lines again to create, oops, now it's looking like prison bars. There you go, you could make a prison, I guess. Not my first thought there, but kind of what it turned out to look like. So I would start out with those verticals again, complete verticals, and then I would create the crossbar maybe, or maybe I would do 2 crossbars by connecting it to that orthogonal. I'm keeping everything in perspective this way. Last, let's say you want to add an extra, like you're trying to figure out how tall a tree would be. Well, I want to think about it by comparison to this building, and then I can draw a tree any way that I want. This time, I drew a tree last time, but this time I'm going to make it a little bit nicer tree. Let's say it kind of sits into the corner of the sidewalk here, and that's part of my overall design scheme. So I kind of have a space that I want that tree to sit in. I'm gonna have some mulch on it, so I'm gonna make the base more rounded. And then maybe this time, like maybe it's winter, so maybe I make it more of like a Y tree. Like it kind of has the branches that come off, and it looks a little less, I guess, full or fluffy. You could also make it more full or fluffy, or maybe I wanna hang like, you know, lights off of it or something for my little town. I mean, think through like places that you visited that you really like the look of the place, and you would like to, you know, add in some details that are similar. So I'm just kind of quickly sketching a little tree here that has the look of a winter tree with not a lot of leaves on it. That's one option, I guess, for your tree. But you want to think about the overall scale by comparison. I mean, usually trees in a city are not super tall. So, I mean, you probably know that already, but just in case you don't, anything you add, like maybe a little pot in your window or something, I'm going to use that orthogonal, not only to determine the angle that the pot should be sitting at, but also, and I might use a vertical as well, just so that I don't draw the pot like actually like at an angle, like it's tipping out of the window. So I'm going to use that vertical, and then I'm going to use this as my angle for my cylinder for my pot, so that I can kind of get that, again, that correct angled perspective. Of course, a pot is, you know, could have a plant in it, and that could be organic, and that could like trail down. That's a huge pot though, because my window's huge. So just kind of keep yourself in check, like, okay, that didn't look right. So I'm gonna go back and erase it, and that's kind of all part of it. My goal with this assignment is to see you thinking about how to include extras and still draw in perspective. So this time I'm gonna draw it a little much more tiny, I guess, so that it makes sense for the building. It doesn't look like it's a gigantic pot, you know, set on a ledge of a, I probably should have set it back a little bit, but set on the ledge of like a huge window. I mean, everything becomes really awkwardly out of scale. Maybe I even think like my doorway should be a bit taller. I go back and I make that correction. So these are things that, like, once you are down to the simplicity of a vertical or an orthogonal, it's just figuring out which one to use for which situation. And then really kind of, you know, you have as many possibilities as you can come up with. So you'll need to draw 4 different buildings, and they need to have windows, doors, there needs to be a sidewalk, there needs to be some extras. I think I've maybe put 10 on there, and that's like the pot. If you drew window panes, that would be an extra. If you drew trees, that'd be an extra. It drew little people on the street, you know, again, remember, if your doorway is only this tall, then the people should be at least, you know, shorter than the doorway, to have everything drawn to scale. So hopefully that's helpful for you this week as you're thinking through creatively how you'll complete your drawing. Hope you guys are doing well. Miss seeing your faces. Wish I was there to like kind of talk you through all this in person, but hopefully this video has been helpful regardless. And maybe I'll see some of you at the Zoom here in about 2 minutes. So have a great rest of your day, and I'll be in touch.